Okay. Thanks for joining. I'm sure, a few people will keep, joining us. Um, so Network Capital and I, we got together and we started this show, called Women in Politics, just to really decode careers in politics, for women specifically. I think, there's not that much that helps break down, entry points, surviving and thriving in politics. And that was really the genesis of this show. It was supposed to be a monthly series, but we're back in 2 weeks since the launch on popular demand, and this time with Tara Krishnaswamy, who is she's a software director by the day and an activist and leading voice for women's representation in politics by, well, what I should say 24/7 really. She is the co-founder of Shakti, which is a pan-India, non-partisan, voluntary citizens pressure group that is working to get more women into state assemblies and parliament in India. She's also the co-founder of Citizens for Bengaluru, a grassroots people's movement that has led some landmark campaigns for the city. On the policy front, she has worked on Lokpal amendments and the Justice Verma Committee for rape law amendments, and presented to multiple Rajya Sabha standing committees, as well as independently has authored on federalism, citizenship, gender, caste issues with leading publications. I've known Tara personally, I think, for a little over a year now, having worked very closely, with Shakti on a campaign during the Bihar state elections in 2020. And I have to say, I think, I learned so much just on mobilizing and leading a successful campaign, a skill important for any budding politician, really. So, when we were talking of the topic of social media as an entry into politics, we couldn't really think of anyone better than Tara to bring on the show. So that's a little background. Utkarsh, would you add anything to it before we dive into questions with Tara?
No, I just want to congratulate you, Anantika. It's such an important conversation, and I'm grateful that Tara has agreed to join us today. I think it's an important topic for both men and women, and I would love for us to have many such conversations in the coming times. I think the larger idea, I would love for Anantika to walk us through in the show, but I think it's a very powerful area to look at democratizing the level playing field in politics. So I'm looking forward to it with a growth mindset. I hope all of you.
Perfect. So Tara, we will move to you now. So you've carved a fierce voice for yourself as a spokesperson for women in politics, and you've also had firsthand experience in working with a political party in India. So tell us a bit more about, your journey of finding and carving this passion for women and politics.
Thank you, Anantika, and thank you, Utkarsh, for the opportunity. I'm very happy to be here and participating in this discussion. I have to say I had a very privileged upbringing, by all accounts. I grew up in a fairly feminist family. Both my mother and my father, they were very fair with me and my brother. There wasn't any gender discrimination. But as a child, I remember even, as far back as my 5th standard, sitting with the Hindu paper in my home in Madras then, and, the daily unrelenting reports of rape and domestic violence and trafficking. And it kind of, even at that age, after a while, it starts to get to you, and you want to really be able to turn it off. The anger builds. So at the same time, because I grew up in this very progressive family, I could still see my, older cousins, trying to, quote, get married and settle down. And, even the woke types looking for a bride with a wheatish white complexion and all the usual stuff, right? So you kind of struggle with the dichotomy of your own world. In the meanwhile, I also started volunteering at a neighborhood NGO, And at that time, it was an AIDS action program which distributed condoms to streetwalkers. So, going to a regular privileged school, this was the first time in my life I actually got to do sort of field work in an unstructured fashion. It wasn't where your school kind of took you on a tour to seeing, or helping underprivileged kids, where things were, quote, set up. Yeah, here you're actually on the street, approaching strangers, having that conversation, figuring out how to increase their safety, right, and health. And it was really illuminating because I would speak to these women along with, I was just a kid then, along with the older NGO volunteers, and they would, the women would tell us how they could be brutalized for simply suggesting that a customer wear a condom, right? And it's mind boggling because you think, what idiots these customers are. It protects them too. But that's not how the power structure works. And that's when it hits you. It opens your eyes to a universe entirely different than sort of the cocooned existence that we have. And there was nothing bigger than that to teach me the notion of consent, right? I saw domestic violence victims return to their abusers, quote, willingly, where willingly means, there's consent under duress because they have no other, they're poor and they have no other means of livelihood, or their children will be harmed. So all of this really opened my eyes to sort of the real world at a fairly young age when I was still a teenager. And my biggest oath to myself was that, my biggest learning was that women in the country had very little access to justice, no agency, no recourse, unless they had, they were educated and independent and had financial independence as well. And a woman's sovereignty and dignity, it entirely hinged upon her ability to afford it, so to speak, not as much the Constitution. But at some point, some of this built up. I mean, meanwhile, I was pursuing my career. I'm an engineer by background. I still hold a tech job. And at some point, I, started to take on social and political work as a way to channel some of this. I started to write initially, and then through some friends, I started to work with a boutique political party called Lok Satta. I refer to it as a boutique party because it was a small party, a liberal party trying to find its footing, in around 2008, 9, 10. At that time, it was trying to find a footing, amongst the behemoths in various states. And it was started in Andhra Pradesh at that time. And there was a sitting MLA. And that was my induction into the political landscape, so to speak.
On this show, we're obviously now looking in today's time, what are the different entry points specifically for women? If you don't come, from a family of say politicians, how is it that you can, can you enter politics? And in this episode, we want to deep dive into, using social media as one such tool. There is no doubt we live in a society where, women have been silenced in different ways for many years. And, politics requires one to have an opinion and also to find strength in, in our voice to state that opinion with confidence. Do you think, social media is an enabler, and has it worked? Has it worked for a few people? What would be your thoughts on that?
Social media certainly has a lot of positives going for it from the perspective of women trying to participate in politics. It also has negatives, of course. We'll talk about the positives first. I mean, the entry barrier is nearly non-existent, right, or non-existent, and that's its biggest positive for women in politics. I say nearly non-existent because if you're a rural woman, female political practitioner, and you can't afford a smartphone, then it really restricts your use of social media, and it's not a level playing field at all. But otherwise, apart from that, it per se doesn't impose an entry barrier. So at the minimum, WhatsApp is accessible to you. Facebook is accessible. So there are many ways by which you can reach your constituents, and these are growing applications and these are growing tools. So that's a great asset. It's not a shrinking landscape like the print media, for example, right? So in that sense, I think that there's a huge positive there. I think the negatives are, equally large. There is the sort of, like the driving while black thing. There's the risk of being a woman while being online. There was a recent, I think, an Amnesty study that said 100 female politicians in India have received more than 1 million instances, right, tweets or comments online that have targeted them, threatened rape or threatened all kinds of terrible things, right? So it's not.
Yeah.
It's not a walk in the park, and you'll be shocked to see. As part of Shakti, we across parties we work with women in politics, and many times even a spokesperson of a ruling party of any given state won't even have a web presence. It's impossible to find a photo of hers. She won't have a wiki entry. There are sitting MPs in parliament today, female parliamentarians, with no Wikipedia entry. So the online presence of women, as low as the entry barrier is, a combination of lack of awareness, a combination of sort of technological illiteracy or low literacy, plus just the non-familiarity of it or not recognizing the importance of it. Women are not as often, political women are not as often and as much on social media as they should be, I think.
And what do you think is, so one part is of course the trolls, right? And we can probably delve into that a bit more. But do you think this is it's an area that, say, budding politicians are missing out on, to be able to carve their voice and state their opinions to enter the scene?
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at women, female politicians like Priyanka Chaturvedi or Mahua Moitra, they're extremely popular and successful online and have been so for a while before they achieved their current positions of ascendancy, right, so to speak. Priyanka Chaturvedi had, lots of followers online. She was a very popular spokesperson even before she joined Shiv Sena and then became a Rajya Sabha MP. And same for Mahua Moitra, was extremely popular online even before she became an MP. So there are positive instances of very, very popular female politicians online, and they can serve as role models for how to build an online presence. But the thing is, social media presence isn't built in a vacuum for politicians, right?
Yeah.
Or for campaigners of any sort. You have to have a strong ground campaign going, and social media is sort of the ancillary tool for recruitment, for mobilization, for advertisement, for outreach, all of the above. But it doesn't stand by itself. That's something budding politicians should recognize, should realize.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely spot on there, Tara. The other thing is, that social media is also, it's turning into a very noisy space. And I think, as obviously, there are, double standards for women politicians. And what we also see is that, confidence isn't always a predictor of competence. But in this very noisy space of, social media, do you think to be heard or to get that kind of attention, do budding politicians or women politicians, do we have to take a very extreme view to basically amplify our voice in this noisy space?
It's a great question, and there isn't like a black and white answer to it. I think it's a nuanced answer. I give you a few examples, and then we'll draw some inferences from that. Recently, during the times of COVID, when the health minister of Kerala, Shailaja, received great praise for the work that she's been doing. There was an interview with the India Today, the then India Today anchor Rajdeep Sardesai, who, subsequent to the interview, tweeted. And his tweet went something like, I don't remember the exact verbiage because I outraged about it as well. So I remember the tweet, but not the exact verbiage. It went something like, Shailaja, a grandmother, and then da-da-da, right? And the reason it was shocking, because we were in the throes of COVID. The interview was purely about how she was handling COVID in Kerala, and she was receiving praise from him too. And to refer to her, this was the single sort of introductory tweet to the program, and to refer to her that way, you can never imagine a male politician, take Amit Shah, the Home Minister is not going to be referred to as a grandfather ever, right? And
Yeah.
yet you look at the Telegraph headline on Smriti Irani, the infamous Telegraph headline on Smriti Irani, it said anti-national. When Nusrat Jahan, made it to the parliament, and Mimi Chakrabarti made it to the parliament, the New Indian Express ran a headline that said, MPs add glam factor. West Bengal
Yeah.
adds glam factor, okay? You can't imagine that when male actors or anyone else makes it to the parliament. So I think so that's an example. Now, how do you react to that example is the question. If you're on social media, if you're the health minister and you're on social media and you catch that tweet, your ability to convert that into sort of making your point, or into an audience for yourself, capitalize on that, versus you're not on social media, you don't do anything about it, right? That's the difference. So it's not as much you're loud as much as you're able to hit your wagon and, to something that's ascending, and build an audience for yourself. The other example I'll give is the campaign that you referred to. You and I are not celebrities, we're ordinary people running campaigns. If you recall the Shakti campaign for the Bihar elections, our goal was to do two things. One is to make the conversation about women's representation be front and center as part of the Bihar campaign.
Yeah.
If we don't do it, then it's very easy for the media and for all of the political conversation to revolve around he said, she said, this politician said this, did that, and this whole blame game, the usual stuff that happens during elections. But
Yeah.
something as key as 50% of the population being unrepresented in the state assembly in a representative democracy, because political parties don't even field women candidates, right? The average across India for political parties, including the biggest national parties, is 9%. You'll rarely find them crossing single digit percentage. If you only field 9% female candidates, you're not going to end up with an assembly or a parliament that has any critical mass of women, not even 25%, 33%, or anything more. So our goal was to make women's representation the front and center of electoral conversation on the one hand, and on the other hand, pressure political parties to field more women candidates, right? These
Yeah.
were our goals, if you recall. Now we are nobodies. We haven't run a campaign in Bihar. And the only way for us to accomplish our goal, through ground campaigns, through reaching the local population, through amplifying that voice, through communicating to political parties that locals want this. This is not some, parachuted aspiration, but Biharis want this. Biharis need this, is by making sure that we leverage real media, print media, that is read by tens of lakhs, in the vernacular, that is read by tens of lakhs of people. So we have to get on media. So now the question is, how do we use social media and how do we use ground campaigns to get on media, right? And that was the problem. For instance, so to your question about, do you have to be shrill? No, I think we have to be creative. And, if you recall, one of the campaigns we ran, because it was COVID times, was, called the Selfless Selfie campaign, where
Yeah.
we reached out to the female panchayat leaders, the female Nyaya panchayat leaders, sarpanches, the female sarpanches and the mukhyas, and said, take a selfie saying that you demand 50% female candidates, right, from all political parties. Maybe mangti hu, or I demand that we have 50% female candidates, and send that selfie, right? And this became viral, and we had thousands, hundreds and thousands of messages where sarpanches and nyaya panchayat heads were holding these little placards. All we wanted them to do was to send a WhatsApp message with their selfie, but they actually wrote it out in a placard, held the placard, took a photograph, nice photograph, smiling and standing in a pose, and sent it out.
Yeah.
And to our surprise, men started sending it out either. So this ended up getting viral on social media, and therefore ended up occupying print space across all of the local dailies, the Dainik Jagrans, the Hindustans, and all the Hindi dailies and the English dailies. So my point is that to to be heard on social media, there's many ways to be heard. You can hitch your wagon to something that's topical. You can run as a political person, you can run a campaign and sort of get visibility for the campaign. But all of this demands that you be creative, that you be on top of things, and you kind of are responsive and aware of the message that you want to send ultimately, right? So
Yeah.
I think there is a road. There is a, I wouldn't say it's a short road. I think there's quite a road for women in politics to traverse. If you look at the volume of how much social media is dominated by men versus women, I think there's quite a road ahead.
Yeah. Um, Thanks, Sarah. Those were some fabulous points, and I just want to touch a bit on agency, and then we'll start opening up to the audience for their comments and questions. When we ran that campaign for the Bihar elections, our one of the first hurdles that we had to cross was to just get to the women sarpanches, right? Because access to the mobile phone was very closely guarded by the male member in the family. But as soon as we got across that hurdle, and we got to the actual head of the village, the woman sarpanch, we most often we got a positive answer saying, of course we support your demand, your what you're asking for, and we will send our picture. And that kind of brings me to the whole point of agency again, which is something, you know do women always hold agency, and if yes, how do they put this across on social media?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, we do know that in India, and Ambedkar famously said this, right, that sort of the social, economic, and the political are three pillars of any democracy. And you can't sort of have progress on one axis without simultaneously progressing on the other axis, or they're going to sort of pull you back. But we all know India, and we have huge amount of challenges, as a society, in terms of social progress, whether it be, and these are intersectional challenges, right? We have challenges across the class axis, along the caste axis, along the gender axis, and a combination of all of the above. In the meanwhile, we have huge economic challenges as well for women. Labor force participation is at an all-time low, has always been low. It's in the teens. It's about 16% now. It was 25%. Nothing to gloat about. And women's access to money and assets is even worse. And even where they have access to money, and I should give you an example here. During the Lok Sabha elections, we had someone from the royal family run for elections from Tamil Nadu. And this is not uncommon, right? Even in Rajasthan, you have it. In many places, you have people from royal families running for elections. So money was not an object for her. She was independently wealthy, already very well educated. She had a job. She was in the financial sector before she got married into the royal family. And she was a two-time mayor of a city. So she's run elections before, she's won elections before. She knows how to do this pat down. But she doesn't have the agency to decide how much she can spend on her campaign, right? That's up to the family to approve. And this is very, very common, right? So it is true that women, and it's not just about rural women or about poor women, and that's why I specifically brought her example. And yet, I think it's a little simplistic to assign everything to agency. When you're on social media and as a woman you say something that's either unpopular or so popular it attracts the trolls, oftentimes all kinds of threats and all kinds of demeaning and insulting verbiage comes your way. And you want to, at some point, it can get so toxic. There are women that log out of social media, or, they log out of that conversation. Now, just imagine for a second that you're a known face with your phone number being public as a female elected representative, whether it is at a sarpanch level, at a corporator level, at an MLA level, or an MP level. Imagine the number of guys who will be calling you, men who will be calling you and saying whatever they please, right? Just whatever they please. So I think there's a part of it that is agency, but there is also a part of it where the woman herself, and I can imagine myself doing that too, would want a male PA very often, as you rightly pointed out. We even call the Bihar MLAs, right? And now
Yeah.
I'm working on a project, working with MPs on a project. Many times the phones are not picked up by the MPs. You'll get a message to call the male PA. And the reason it's that way is because they also want to shield themselves from what can come their way because of the cultural, the social issues that we have, challenges that we have.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, there is a multiple facets of this before women can independently operate on social media. There's also the piece where some of these women that we contacted have told us that it's easy to imagine that even at a panchayat level, when you have 33 to 50% women, that, why aren't these women operating independently? There is a third aspect to it, right? The third aspect is that the men don't necessarily allow them to operate independently. In my own city of Bangalore, my own corporator, who's a female, she heads the meetings, and sometimes when she's conducting the meetings, her husband will sit with her, next to her, and elbow her as she speaks. Basically, he wants to be able to control what she says, how much she says when she speaks, right? And the ironic thing is, we have a law in India that says impersonating a public officer in any way, appropriating her job, or giving instructions to road contractors on her behalf, inspecting works on her behalf, or even sitting with her in meetings, her or him, is a punishable IPC offense. But as you
Yeah.
know, most people will deflect that blame onto the female corporator or sarpanch or MLA, and not blame the man who's impersonating, who's committing a criminal offense. So where I'm going with
Yeah.
this is that the stereotypes in our minds also decide what the problem is, as opposed to us genuinely looking at what the problem is for women operating independently.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think in Rajasthan they passed a law where where they were basically putting the female sarpanches in jail if their male relatives were found to be kind of running the show on behalf
Yeah,
of them.
draconian law, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, I think let's get some audience interaction. So anyone who has a question or comment, please raise your hand and we let you in. I think we have one already. Hey Ram, let me know if you can speak now. Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Very interesting topic. I'm glad to be a part of this. I've been very politically involved in the past 5-6 years. I've worked on campaigns. I've created strategies and campaigns for Aam Aadmi Party for the past two elections that they won in, and for Indo-Pak peace in the past many years. So, yeah, very interesting to have this as a topic, and I've constantly spoken about having more women representation in politics. And I just tuned in a bit late, so I heard some of the things that you guys were saying, and it's very interesting that you're talking about the usage of social media to have more entry of women into politics. I think at one level, the biggest hurdle to this, I think women form 50% of the population. So that's like the largest vote bank for women already. So just
Yeah.
sheer fact that you have 50% of the vote bank, nobody splits it in that way. Everyone splits it in terms of religion. They're splitting in terms of caste. Not before has anyone split the vote bank as women. So if there are women who come out and say just women vote for women, it already is a game changer. Then the only thing you'll have to do is to convince women to not listen to their husbands or to their fathers when they're going in to vote. That's a fairly simple campaign. That's the only bit I wanted to add.
Interesting comment, Ram, and good to hear from you. We've spoken about this before as well. Um, I think women need to be able to get everyone's votes, not just women's votes, of course, in order to win. There's just no choice. But also, we must understand, I think there's a common, there's often comments about women focusing on women's issues, both as part of the campaign and, after they get elected. And to be clear, when you're a people's representative, you're a people's representative. You can, many of us are outraged when representatives stand up and say, we will only represent a certain section of the population. So once you're elected, whether someone voted for you or not, you represent everyone. So women or men, they need both the votes, and they need to ensure that, they're making policies on everything from water to, electricity to roads to, of course, issues that concern, around gender or underprivileged classes and so forth. But certainly the lived experiences of women when brought to policy making, I think can quite transform India in terms of, if you recall when the GST first was devised, sanitary napkins came out with 16% tax on sanitary napkins. And it took a whole year before that was rescinded. And as if that were not enough, when the lockdown was announced, again, sanitary napkins didn't make it to the list of essential commodities. And for the first couple of weeks until a revised list came out, numerous, especially underprivileged women who don't stock the essential commodities suffered. So this sort of, egregious things, these are egregious examples, but even everyday policy making from water and electricity to essential commodities, I think can hugely benefit from the lived experiences of women that are quite distinct from men in this country. Even within women are quite distinct, but certainly across the genders are quite different.
Yeah, I hear you.
Just a thought there. I think, it's, I think maybe this was in one of the ISD groups that we had and a session that we had, Tara, I don't know if you remember this, but, when you ask a lot of, say, budding women politicians as well, what do you kind of, see yourself as in the next 10 years if you were to become a minister? Very often women will choose, I want to be the women and child minister or like the HRD ministry, but it's very rare that you'll have, someone turn around and say, I want to be the home minister or the defense minister. And I think there's some kind of a conditioning that is at play there as well, right? Which is that just because you're a woman, you will only look at some of, the very women and focused ministries.
I have a question for both of you, actually. Would you consider joining politics and running the country?
Tara has already had a stint with, with running a political party. So I will, let her answer for herself. If I was to give you a short answer, Ram, definitely, I would.
That's great.
Yeah.
Happy to know that.
Yeah, I didn't run for office. I've run election campaigns before, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I was saying, perhaps before you joined, that it's extremely addictive. So, I mean, I'm still in politics because Shakti is very political.
No, yeah. absolutely understand. I know, and I know what you mean by like that. It is extremely addictive because when you are at when you are creating at or like, how do I put this? When you are in a creating campaigns at a level which is that many people involved, it's like a different space altogether, and it's quite a lot of it's quite very interesting.
Thanks, Ram.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Tara.
No, I was just going to say that, on the expectation that, women in particular focus on women and women's issues after they are elected. There's just even recently I was talking to a group of political aspirants in Kerala, and some of the men were saying, even our female representatives are not worried about public toilets and public urination. Shouldn't they be or about sexual harassment? Shouldn't they be the first ones to champion this? Again, I think, it's wonderful as we, when we as individuals, we achieve a certain position of privilege or achieve a certain position of power in our own careers, whatever that may be, being a first line manager, or that may be being a CEO, and we kind of turn around and say, how many more people can I elevate, right? That's a wonderful thing to do, and it would be great if people did it. But that said, to have completely differential expectations of women where, they are expected to as a minority in politics, right? Remember that you don't hold the leverage when you're the minority. Remember that in a political party, the treasurers, the fundraising managers, the constituency chiefs, the district heads, the manifesto committee heads, the candidate selection committees, these are not staffed by women. These are not even staffed by, a majority of women, or these are not staffed by a quarter of women. Sometimes most of the times you have zero women doing this. So when you are sort of a rarefied minority, and to expect to now turn around and push your agenda is a very, very difficult thing to do. During the Bihar elections, we had a panel discussion with that included people from all parties. A woman from the BJP called Kiran Ghai, she was an MLC in Bihar, and she made a very telling comment. She said, as the number of sexual harassment and rape cases in Bihar increased, and a particular week or a couple of weeks when there were so many gruesome cases, and she wanted to raise that in the Legislative Council. There were a couple of women in the Legislative Council among hundreds of men, and when they wanted to raise it and they brought it up, the men MLCs laughed. So this is this is not unusual. This is an example to say just how terrific the barriers are for the women to surmount before they can raise the simplest of things on behalf of their constituents. So it's very easy for us to sit on the outside and expect that the few women that are there, overwhelmed by the hundreds of men, will magically change things. Oftentimes when there are gruesome incidents, we say, why didn't this female minister comment? Why didn't that female politician comment? Yes, it would be good if they commented, but they do comment inside their parties, and they are muzzled just as the men are muzzled. Indian political party system is a very, very undemocratic system, right? It's completely not suited to a democracy. In all other democracies, parties have internal elections to select candidates, right? Party processes are transparent. Every single person who contributes donates to a party, because we need to know who's influencing the party decisions and policies and vested interests. In India, all of this is closed, which means that parties are opaque and completely undemocratic entities that are attempting to run a democracy. It's just it's an oxymoron right there. So what happens inside the parties, we don't know. And it's not that the women don't raise it or men don't raise it, but they're not allowed to raise it outside. Occasionally it still seeps through, but for the most part, they're actually muzzled. They don't have that agency. We talk about agency for budding politicians. Sitting ministers don't have agency.
Thanks, Sarah. Just moving on, Kanta, Priya, do you want to come in? Any comment?
Anantika, I just had a quick one. Maybe Tara can weigh in at some point. Hey, have you noticed, Tara, in your observations or conversations where, suppose on average, are women less open to sharing political opinions because of a fear of backlash, or in your observation, it's the same across men and women? In my very limited sample, I've seen that perhaps there is some analysis that needs to be done there. Just like speaking on the basis of my friends and the people I've interacted in Europe, in the US, in India, I see that the number is slightly lower on the side of women. Why is that? Do you have an opinion, or is there any study done on that?
I think there are lots of studies done on that. I personally had multiple occasions where I've witnessed that as well. I also teach public policy classes, and one time here at the Mount Carmel College during the public policy class, and I think Anantika was referring to this earlier as well in terms of political aspirations for women. You ask the women what they want to be, and you sort of go through a list of career options, right? Things that are not things that are more public, if you will, right? Not running a business is somewhat more private. You're within that business sector, versus being a journalist is a very public thing to do, being in media. So you go through some of these very public careers, and you see that women are well aware, and many of them, or some of them want to be, say, journalists or be in media. But you ask if they want to be in the police service or they want to be in politics, the numbers drop, right? Part of the reason is also because we don't have role models, right? You don't grow up with people saying, with seeing other women, seeing strong female police officers, female DGPs, people venerating them, or parents, holding them up on a pedestal and saying, "Go aspire to be like that." I think there's a lot of that conditioning that influences what they end up saying. But also the Kirangai example that I just gave. If you're put in a room of you as an urban male are put in a room of rural females and they're talking about, I don't know, harvesting something, you may hesitate to offer an opinion because you're not amongst people whose lives you're familiar with. I think that very often happens to women in politics. They are often amongst a majority of men. In fact, Surabhi Hudigare, who used to run a political consultancy, and she helped run the political campaign for one of the MPs here in Bangalore. She used to say, and I've seen that myself as part of Lok Sabha, you almost always walk into a room full of men when you're running an election campaign. Okay, so now think about the messaging. In fact, talking about the AAP campaign that Ram referred to, right? I did an analysis after that, talking to the AAP folks who ran the campaign, Jasmine and others. AAP got a preponderance of the female vote this time when they won the state elections, right? They got the female vote because of the work they've done with water, because of the work they've done with electricity, work they've done with schools and so forth. And we went back and analyzed the ads and the political communication and messaging that they had done. They had done not a single piece of messaging specifically targeted at women, meaning there wasn't any poster that came out. You know how you've seen these Ujjwala posters where you have a woman and then you have this Ujjwala, some verbiage, and you have the Prime Minister's face, right? So
Yeah.
that poster is geared towards women, right? Now, AAP didn't gear posters and messages specifically towards women. That wasn't a specific communication or campaign strategy for the work they'd done with water or electricity or schools. So, so think about this. Political communication, for the most, look at the rallies. 99% of the audience of the rallies, except one cluster of women at the back or in a corner or, sort of clumped together, are men. So you walk into into an election campaign, it's full of men. So most of the political communication, most of the political messaging is of, for, and by men, for men. Right? So it's very difficult for, I think, women to speak up and express an opinion because sometimes it almost feels alien. In fact, during election, whenever there are state elections, I run this thing on Facebook where I specifically write about elections for women, and I see a huge response from women, right? Because you're writing it deliberately to cater to without assumptions, without the standard assumptions of what political news will look like, which is the reason you see TV news, it caters to men. You see the ads will cater to men. The news audience is men, and the TRPs are driven by male audiences for news.
Yeah. Very interesting. Thanks, Tara. Just to kind of reset the room, we've had a lot of people who've just joined. This is a show geared towards apolitical conversations, helping decoding, and making a career in politics, specifically for women. With that, I will invite, Kanta, Priya, Kunal, any comments, questions?
Hey guys, hi Tara, hi Antika. Super interesting conversation, and thanks for doing this. I was just thinking, Tara, since you've been working on ground and you have such an incredible experience, wondering what would be, is there a set path, like say if someone wants to enter politics being a woman, you think there's a defined way to do it, or given, as you mentioned, there are too many barriers and, with like social media and so much going on around, what would be a step 0 or a step 1 for someone as a guidance if you were to tell something about it?
This is a great question. And, not too long ago, just maybe 3 or 4 months ago, I asked Priyanka Chaturvedi the same thing in a panel that I was moderating, saying, when we join our corporate careers as at any level, actually, whether you're switching a career or you're joining fresh out of college, you have sort of a path that's laid out in front of you. They take you through an orientation, they tell you about the various positions in the company and in your department, and they tell you what the different roles do and how you climb up the career ladder, right? Many companies have this sort of thing. And I was asking her, knowing very well what the answer was, that, whether political parties offer this kind of orientation and sort of induction into the landscape for women who are joining anew. And the answer is no. I mean, you're literally, thrown into the jungle to fend for yourself. So, to back up to your question, one of the reasons why this notion of a women's wing exists, and it's sort of a double edged sword, if you will, right? Because politics has such a nasty reputation in India, a lot of, and back to, Anantika's comment about, do women have the agency to decide this for themselves? Even people like Priyanka, or, so many other women have mentioned that they've been given a clock, right? They've been told, either they are told, no, you can't enter politics because whatever, it's too dangerous, it's too toxic, dirty politics. Or they're told, if you enter, you have a clock, it's ticking. You have X number of years, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. And if you don't get to point Z, then sorry, you've got to dial out, come back and continue your career, right? So there are all these constraints on women, and that is one of the reasons why we have such a thing as a women's wing in a political party. As sort of many of us think of it as anathema, right? Why do you have this special spot for women? And it seems almost like a dead end spot, because you rarely hear of women who've been in the women's wing who are actually successful. You look at all of by the classic definition of success. By that I mean you get a ticket, you're able to stand for elections, you win an election, right? Simple definition of success. You hardly see anyone from the women. The majority of the women who achieve electoral success are not from the women's wing of any party, right? So why have a women's wing? Well, one of the things that you talked about, which is there a path for women? A lot of the families, especially rural families, small towns, they allow these young women to participate in politics only because of the safety net, the sort of the soft ramp that the women's wing gives. So you're able to tell your family, look, no, I'm not joining the big bad wolf. I'm really joining this little, safe, secluded little space within a political party where I'll be interacting with women day in and day out, the women in the party. So, I'm sort of safe. So that is one ramp. Now, what happens after that? Is that a dead end? And that's the piece that's the mystery. It's very difficult. There isn't a trodden path. And like we earlier referred, there aren't very many role models either who groom you. Now, some of this is changing, right? More and more you see, for instance, the Shiv Sena announced programs to induct and train women so that they can create the next generation of female MLAs. The BJP announced that for Assam just now. They said they're going to do that with 1,000 women. And, it remains to Congress has announced a mission Shakti. They announced it earlier. So many parties on and off do this. At the end of this, that's the problem, right? At the end of this, we don't really see a huge pipeline of women come out. And that is not because of lack of interest, because each of their women's wings have lakhs of women, if not crores of women, right? And yet there isn't a trodden path, or there aren't role models or a well-defined career path. So that's the challenge. It is very difficult, and that is why you see women who are networked into political families are more often successful and more easily navigate this path, because you have somebody to guide them, to tell them what are the steps to take. And many of these women, and we must remember, as much as we put down dynasty and put down this connection to political families, that the rest of India is no different at all. Our businesses are business families. Our colleges are run by families. Everything is run by families. People don't give away their businesses to rank strangers in India like they do in the US or other places, Europe. So politics is no different. It's an old boys club, and if you're networked, you're more likely to succeed.
Yeah, I think this is a point that even Neha in the first episode had touched on. which is exactly what you're saying, Tara, that if you have some kind of an inclination or socializing rather in it, it probably is easier to kind of survive and thrive. Thanks, Priya. I'll move on to Kunal. Any comment, question from you? Kanta, anything from yourself? I can see there's another person coming in. Devyani, if you can hear me, please do go ahead with your question or comment.
Hello.
Hey.
Hi. It's a very engaging conversation. Thank you for all the insights. However, I just had one question. So there are a lot of women who are in politics, for example, Harsimrat Kaur Bahadur, who come with political backgrounds. I just had a very simple question. Why are these women accused of why are they considered as proxy candidates just because they have political dynasties?
That's a fantastic question. It's a question that, goes right back to the very root of patriarchy. The number of sons and nephews and, uncles and, in fact, son-in-laws, father-in-laws. This Bihar elections, we had, a son-in-law contest from the opposing party as the father-in-law, for example, right? You just don't
Yeah.
hear enough about it compared to just how bad a name women get on account of dynasty. And the odd thing is that it is not these women who are deciding that they must be candidates. Remember that candidate selection is separate and distinct from expressing interest to be a candidate, right? So, women or men, whoever expresses interest to be a candidate, that's all they can do. The candidate selection committee is a high powered committee of the movers and shakers in the party who ultimately decide whom to give tickets to. And if they are choosing a woman or man who's related to somebody, then the onus is on them to explain why they keep favoring certain sets of people. So, but you're absolutely right. But the burden of proof seems to be, unvaryingly and unfairly on the women, as if the fact that they are related itself is sort of a cross to carry. It's not a fair cross to carry.
So is it like based on pre-existing gender biases, can we say?
Absolutely. If you look at the number of reportage, just do a Google search for women dynasty, and you will see what percentage of female candidates come from political families, what percentage of female elected representatives, MLAs and MP, come from political families. You won't find that same thing as easily for men, or not at all. And worse still, I would argue that it's almost impossible to find for anybody, because do you know that the current sitting government, the cabinet, the majority of people are dynastic? The majority of people. But that's not information that is easily available, because for a lot of the people, their grandfather was the general secretary of the party, or the uncle was, the general secretary of a state.
Yeah.
These are not easy connections. It's very easy if your husband was an MLA, especially for women, right? The name gives it away, or the husband or the father. For men, it's much more difficult to find a nephew. The sitting MP in Tejasvi Surya in Bangalore, in South Bangalore, is the nephew of a sitting MLA, right? But a lot of the people don't know that connection, and it's very difficult to find that connection, because some of them weren't even elected. They are party functionaries, but very high level functionaries. Now, how do you find those connections in India? We all know how caste and community networks work. So the fact is that, politics, as I said before, is no different than any other profession in India, where businesses are run by families, they pass on to families. Cricket boards are run by families. There's nepotism charges everywhere. So it's really no different. India is India.
I had a very basic question, if I can continuously ask. So, what is your advice for women who are interested in entering into politics, or young women who are interested, but because of all of these factors, maybe their morale goes down, or they just deviate from not just entering into politics, any profession but politics. So, what suggestion, advice do you have for these young women who are interested?
See, there are two paths that one could possibly take, right? One is the lateral entry path. like a Mahua Moitra took, or any number of, you see actors taking that path most often. But Mahua Moitra was in the finance space before she took it. Priyanka Chaturvedi was in business before she took it. There are people who are successful in their fields and then enter politics. So they enter laterally, meaning they don't have to work their way up the ranks, right? You can enter as the head of a youth wing, or as a spokesperson. Nirmala Sitharaman, the finance minister, is a great example of that, right? She entered as a spokesperson. The party had a hole where they needed an English-speaking national spokesperson. There she was. She played the role, the party was happy, and she got, bigger and bigger and more plum roles. So there is a lateral entry opportunity, and that means, you pursue your own career, a non-political career, while you kind of keep these connections and networks and all of that stuff. And when you switch into an appropriate place. There's no guarantee of success, as with any career, but that's an option, is the lateral entry. The other is, of course, to work your way up, right? And you to work your way up, you basically have to have an established, recognizable presence in your constituency. You're either you've developed a base by helping people in some way. You've sort of grown your constituency. You've grown your supporter base, because you've not stood for election. I don't want to call it vote base, but your supporter base, and therefore you're in a position to join a party. When you join a party, make it very simple. Very often you see these pieces of news, right? XYZ joined this party. Right now, the Bengal elections are going on. You repeatedly hear of somebody or the other joining a party, right? So when you join a party, if 500 people join with you because your supporter base is 500, you've really impressed the party bosses. If 1,000 people join with you, you're going to get a hero's welcome. If 10,000 people join with you, you'll likely get a ticket. You'll be in contention for the ticket on day one. So basically, you can work your way up, but it depends on the leverage that you bring, because in politics, everything is about numbers. So if you have numbers, aggregate of people behind you, you're the boss.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Right. Thanks, Tara. Thanks, Devyani. We're almost at time, but I do want to get in Lakshmi and the other person we've got on stage. So quick questions and comments from you before we close.
I think Priya's hand has also been up for a while.
Go ahead, Lakshmi. We'll get Priya too.
So I had a very quick question about class and gender. The difference between a Mahua Moitra and a Mamta and a Mayawati, and you know what I mean, where at some level, like, yes, it has been used against sort of the Gandhis, that they're out of touch and they're rich and they're upper class. But I wonder how class and gender plays out in Indian politics. Is there an authenticity problem? When Moa went to the same college as me. We both are Mount Holyoke alums. But when Moa makes fantastic speeches in perfect English, but I wonder if it's some ways today that prevents her from being the prime minister of this country that it wouldn't have for Indira Gandhi, or a Priyanka Gandhi has to work a little harder than someone else. You know what I'm saying? It's like, I just want to talk about that intersection of class and gender. That's it.
No, it's a great question. And, this is one of those, it's actually not a simple or a short question, but I'll leave you with a couple of remarks. One is that, did you know that Naveen Patnaik, the four-time chief minister of, or five-time chief minister of Odisha, right? He doesn't speak in Odia. He gives English speech. He doesn't speak at all. He rarely speaks. When he does, it's in English, and it's very short, right? He's very well known for this, right?
I had no idea that was true.
Yeah, that is. Go look him up, right? So the thing is, of course, he is Biju Patnaik's son, and which the rest of us aren't. But nevertheless, Odisha, as you know, is a tribal state. There is far less English penetration and it's not an urban state. So, if anything, it's a bigger challenge in Odisha than anywhere else. The point is this: there's no one formula, is what I'd say. right? Mahua is an MP, so it's an asset, much like Jayalalitha. Her first position was the spokesperson of the party, just like Mahua, or rather Mahua just like Jayalalitha. National spokesperson, this is because she's English speaking. Same as Nirmala Sitharaman, she became the national spokesperson because she could speak English in a Hindi party, right? Jayalalitha could speak English in a Tamil party. And Mahua Moitra could speak English in a Bengali party. So they become national spokespeople. And then they stand for elections. Jayalalitha's first election, at first she got sent as an MP, right, as a Rajya Sabha MP. And that's where she made her fantastic speeches, so much so that, Indira Gandhi, by then her reputation was so great that Indira Gandhi, the then Prime Minister, made time to come to Parliament, to Rajya Sabha, to listen to Jayalalitha speak, right? So it's Mahua's trajectory is not that unusual, right? At the same time, I know what you're saying. Mamata Banerjee is a grassroots politician. Mayawati is a grassroots politician. And that is why I said there's two ways to enter this. It depends on what your party wants and depends on what your goal is. The thing about politics is keeping your eyes open for the opportunity and sort of carpe diem, as they say, right? You seize the day. So in the case of, say, Priyanka Chaturvedi, Shiv Sena needed an urban national face that represented liberty and egalitarian views, the opposite of their image. BJP needed an English-speaking face to nationally rationalize what they were doing, way back in 2012 and 13 and in the run-up to 2014 elections, as TMC needed with Mahua Moitra or ADMK needed with Jayalalitha. And they seized the day. Now, as far as the trajectory for Mamta or Mayawati or others are concerned, that's the second part of the answer I gave to the previous question, which is become a grassroots politician, have the numbers behind you, and if you can do that well, you're unshakable. That's another way to become, get to the top of your game. So there's many ways to do that.
Yeah. I think the other one, which we explored in our first episode, Neha Joshi from the BGYM had spoken about, is also university politics. I guess would be another way. But I think that kind of also goes down to grassroots
yeah.
At some point, to what you said, Tara. Thanks, Lakshmi. Yeah. Bhumanya, I'm going to move to you next. Yes.
All right. So the last thing. Okay, so I have always been very interested in politics. And I remember once talking to my friend a few years back, 4-5 years back. And I was like, you know what, I'm really interested in politics and what should I do really to navigate? And this person just passed a comment, and then I was trying to draw a parallel with corporate life as well. He said that, if you really want to join politics, then there's something that you have to change in you. And I was like, what? You have to be somebody who is masculine and who has these masculine traits, is aggressive. You see that in corporate, right? Women who are successful are like that. And if at that time parallels were like, what's her name? Anybody, Mamata Banerjee, if you talk about or if you talk about even for that matter, any woman, if I take, at that time, they were something like that. And now I see that at least that mentality is changing. In corporate world as well, it's changing. Now you see more women who need not to be aggressive and that masculine type. They can just be themselves, and they can make their point of view and they're heard. How long do you think that will change in politics, that a woman can just be the way they want to be?
Politics is a mirror of society. It's nothing but a little microcosm. Okay, so you can be yourself, provided you can wear exactly what you want and go exactly where you want, exactly at the time you want, provided you have your own car and perhaps either a few people by your side or some male companions or lots of female companions or whatever. When you live in that cocooned universe, you can do exactly what you want. But otherwise, you and I both know that real life, you can't do exactly what you want, right? So if you actually have to walk to the bus stop, catch a bus, go someplace and come back, then you will dress differently, go at a different time and make different choices. And politics is that, walking to the bus stop, catching the bus. So very often when you go on campaigns, most constituencies are not uniformly urban, unless you're just running in a little, Bandra square kilometers in Mumbai or, the fanciest parts of Delhi or Bangalore. Most places, constituencies are, spread far and wide, and you have urban and rural. And in many places, when you go and stay and you campaign, you will be staying in very modest accommodations. Many MPs today and MLAs today tell me that when they stay with their entourage, you actually share a room with men, okay? And there is a bed sheet or a sari in between where you're sleeping in your bed, and there's a bunch of men on the other side. So, and there's a shared bathroom. So you the ability to be yourself. Today, one of the female political party members was telling me that they are young women, right? They're expected to wear a sari, not even allowed to wear a salwar kameez. Not that someone says don't do it, they're going to make past comments on you all the time. Now, does this happen to everyone? Does it happen all the time? Perhaps not, right? But this happens way too often. We are not quite ready for women can be women, and just do what they feel is right and still be respected for their decisions. Political parties are extremely masculine and toxically so. So it's difficult to navigate, which is part of the reason why women from political families it's actually a good thing, because they have that security net, that shelter. Sexual harassment is rampant. So most parties, barring one, don't have the internal complaints committee as mandated by the Prevention of Sexual Harassment Act. So, which means that there is nowhere to even go and complain. So people are extremely careful, and you can't just be yourself for the most part. You have to be extremely careful. Unless you're in a privileged position, which is how we are in society. We're on Clubhouse on an iPhone. So you and I, yes, we can be how we want, but most women can't.
Thanks, Tara. Last one, we'll move to you, Kanksha, and then we'll close.
Thanks, guys. Unfortunately, I only just joined, so I'm just wondering. So what's the space like for right-wing women that want to enter politics? Do you see that they use social media, or what's your experience been with this? And do you see right-wing women in the space, like, young women?
When you say in this space, you mean just politics or social media or Clubhouse or?
Using social media to enter politics.
Okay. I think actually the right wing, in particular, both BJP and Shiv Sena, are extremely successful at recruiting women. They're probably the most successful of all parties currently at recruiting women. The number of women joining the right wing parties is astronomical. As far as usage of social media as well, especially the BJP, as you know, is at the top of its game. So the ramp for women wanting to use social media in the BJP is also easier in terms of it's easy to get your voice amplified. There's a certain ready-made set of followers that you're likely to inherit. So actually, right-wing politics is right now for women just purely in terms of number of women. I'm not talking about whether they're able to exercise their agency and whether they'll actually get an opportunity to run. And even if they do, if they can sort of exert their agency to govern, right? I'm not talking about all that. I'm simply talking about, like you said, their ability to enter politics and use social media. It's probably the fastest growing segment of women in politics. I think Priya's hand has been raised for a long time, Anantika. Maybe we do
I've been trying to get her up, but I know Priya was one of the first to ask her question.
Okay.
So I think we've probably covered her point. I think we will close. We've had a great discussion. We've gone over our 1 hour. Tara, thank you so much. I think, just to kind of, summarize, some of the things we touched on was, of course, agency, and to your very, recent point that you made. I think agency is not that simplistic, especially when it comes to women exercising that in the field of politics. But we do see that, when given a chance, we are seeing more and more women express themselves in this space. And the other part that you had mentioned is that when it comes to social media, you don't always have to have a shrill voice to be heard. And I think, we're probably going to, see and wait for, more and more women thinkers to come out. I think we already have some great ones. And, having Neha and you just on the first 2 episodes has just been fabulous, because this is exactly what the objective of the show is, to is to be a platform for, women in politics, and to be the platform for their voice. So thanks, Tara, and we'll be back with another episode very soon. Any closing comments from yourself, Tara?
Thank you so much, Anantika and Utkarsh. It's been an absolute pleasure. I love talking about this, and there's volumes to talk about this. So I hope it was useful and enjoyable to others as it was for me. I'll just leave this with a positive comment that I noticed tons of young women starting to express both aspirations, take concrete measures to be political. I personally know, and I can see a difference between the first 5 years that I was doing this and then now. I see a ton of young women standing up and saying, of course I'm going to run. I can't wait for the elections to be declared, right? And there's so many of them rolling up their sleeves, hundreds of them literally joining classes, taking training in order to groom themselves as politicians and then ready to jump into the electoral fray. So I think there's a lot of hope for India, and I'm very happy about that.
Thanks, Sarah, and thanks everyone for tuning in. Really appreciate it, and we'll be back soon.
Thank you, and
Good
good
evening.
night.
Bye.